For the latest, CNN's Marshall Cohen is live for us in Washington. Good to have you with us, Marshall. So the indictment could come at any moment, really. Talk to us about the timing and how is Trump reacting?
Hey, Linda, it does appear that things are moving a little faster than expected down in Fulton County in Georgia. As you mentioned a few moments ago, two key witnesses already went before the grand jury, former state representative Bee Nguyen and former state senator Jen Jordan, both Democrats who bore witness to a series of hearings in front of the state legislature there where Trump allies, including Rudy Giuliani, presented bogus and debunked claims of voter fraud. That is a key part of the investigation. So they've already testified, and there are two other witnesses that were expected to go in tomorrow that just confirmed in the past hour that they are actually going to go in today. Things are moving faster than expected. That's former Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, a Republican who is now a CNN contributor, and an independent journalist named George Cheedy, who in December 2020 witnessed some of the Trump supporters meeting in the state house as part of the quote-unquote fake electors plot to subvert the Electoral College. And Linda, for his part, Donald Trump is responding the way that he always does when he has got his back up against the wall and facing legal scrutiny. He is on the attack. Earlier this morning, he posted on Truth Social that Jeff Duncan shouldn't testify to the grand jury. That, of course, has raised questions about possible witness intimidation because he attacked Duncan as a loser and a nasty guy and all kinds of invective thrown in his direction. Duncan was on our air in the previous hour and he declined to respond to Trump. He would not say one way or the other if he felt intimidated. He said, all I want to do is go in and tell the truth. Linda.
All right. Marshall Cohen from Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us. Thank you. Well, CNN's Stephen Collinson joins us now to discuss why a potential Georgia indictment for Trump is so significant. Good to see you, Stephen. So
hey.
the former president is expected to face this fourth indictment at any moment. But this one, if convicted, he can't get out of with a presidential pardon, right?
Right, so this is a little bit more complicated, and a lot of it is to do with the federalism that is the basis of the US political system, the separation of powers and the division of power between states and the central government in Washington. In theory, if Trump is re-elected president next year, he could appoint an attorney general that could halt any ongoing prosecutions against him. He may have the power to pardon himself, as outlandish as that seems, for any previous federal convictions. And the federal investigations in this case are the ones by Special Counsel Jack Smith into the election interference and the alleged misuse of classified documents down at Trump's resort in Mar-a-Lago. But because of the federalism in the United States Constitution, he doesn't have the power to override a conviction or to stop proceedings that are taking place in one of the states. I think he would see a lot of litigation going on and claims by Trump's team that as president, he cannot be subject to a criminal prosecution along the lines of guidelines that were established by the Justice Department way back in the Watergate scandal in the 1970s. But presumably, and it looks like he doesn't have the same kind of protections that he could get if he is president. So that's why this is significant. Having said that, if this case goes ahead and he's indicted in Georgia, we're looking at a racketeering case with many witnesses, potential co-conspirators, and that would take a very long time. So the chances of it being finished by the time of the next election seem quite slim.
And speaking of the next election and fundraising efforts, Donald Trump seems to be cashing in on these indictments. I just want to bring up a chart which highlights every time there's an indictment, he has this surge in fundraising. And this is only showing amounts, donations that are over $200. So clearly this is helping him.
Well, yes, there is clearly great support from the Republican grassroots for Donald Trump as he runs for his third consecutive Republican nomination. He's leading the polls by 20 to 30 points, slightly less than that in some of the key early voting states, but nevertheless he's a strong front runner. And I think you have to remember that Donald Trump's political campaign is now almost exactly the same as his defense in all these cases. He's arguing he's being politically persecuted. So the two different strands here have come together. I think the question will become if there is a fourth indictment and when Donald Trump has to spend large portions of next year when he could be campaigning on the campaign trail in trials in criminal courts, whether this starts to weigh upon his prospects and whether some Republicans start to think that perhaps another nominee would be preferable. But right now, you're right. His fundraising does take a spike every time this happens. And that's good for Trump because he's spent millions and millions of dollars, which would have been going to the mechanics of a campaign. And he's been paying his legal bills and those of his associates with it. So, he really needs that money to keep rolling in.
All right, Stephen Collinson for us in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.